Hey, all right.
Hey, how are
Hey,
you?
I'm good. How are
Awesome.
you?
Awesome. I'm great. So, welcome to Shit You Don't Know, the podcast where real life meets real talk. We're your host, Dr. Laura Beth Martin, and
Heather Matchett.
a pharmacist and a nurse with over 40 years of experience and tons of stories to share with you guys. We're diving into all the life lessons and mistakes and the moments where we wish we had already known that that can change the course of your life. And so hopefully you'll join us for a mix of humor, heart, and helpful advice as we uncover the shit you don't know. Your go-to guide for all the things nobody told you about. Ta-da!
Amen. Amen.
All right, Heather, how are you? Let's
I'm
catch
doing
up.
good. Got a lot going
Good.
on in the old personal life, but we're
Yep.
we're muddling through, making it work.
Yep. So Heather and I both have kiddos graduating high
Yes.
school in the next couple of weeks.
Oh, I can't believe it. I just can't
I know.
believe it.
I know. I'm not doing well. I'm not doing well over here.
And then I only have one left. Then I only have one left to go.
So how old is he? I'm not going to say his name on here unless you want to, but
He's
uh
16. Well, he'll be 16 in 2 days. Well, on Thursday he'll be 16.
okay. Okay,
Yeah.
so he and my guy are real like what, it's like 6 months apart, maybe? Not even.
Yeah. Right
Yeah,
around there.
okay. But I think is he a sophomore?
He is a freshman.
Okay, so they're both freshmen. Oh, we're on this journey together. Yay.
Oh, we're gonna get to do this again in 4 years or 3 years now.
Yes. So So Heather has older children, just like I have older children, but her kids are a little bit older than my oldest, and then we both have one that's like 18. And apparently we both have one. How did we not know this? I mean, I think we did know this at one point.
Yeah,
Obviously, we were pregnant at the same time. We would have known, but yeah, like it's time goes by.
so
So we both have
fast.
one that's 15, 16-ish, and then I spun the wheel again because why not? And so I have one that's 10, but he's my special needs kiddo, so he may be with us forever. I don't know yet. We'll see. We'll
We'll
see.
see.
It's okay either way. We'll figure it out as we get there. Um, yeah, I don't know when they got this big. It's horrible.
I I
It's
know.
horrible.
I was thinking about when I moved down here, how small they were. You know,
Hmm.
and it seemed like
Yeah,
everything has just been in such crazy fast motion since we moved here
yeah,
that I turned
yeah,
around and I'm like, oh my god, you're 18, you're
yeah.
16 years old. Like, this is crazy. I'm not
Right.
ready.
Well,
Yeah.
and I think COVID happening in the middle of their childhoods
Ugh.
was not. I mean, obviously it was horrible for them. My kids are still feeling the effects of COVID
I
isolation,
mean,
and it's impossible not to, I think.
yeah,
But
I think about when I compare my two sets of kids, like,
mhm,
their
mhm,
experience in high school and the way they were
right,
socially and things like that, how much different it is for
right,
these younger two, especially in high school,
yeah,
which I think is very much pandemic related. And
mhm,
having to
mhm,
switch in the middle, and then, being so isolated, and then
right.
for me, like, just, and I feel like terrible mom of the year here because, like, I was under so much stress at work that I just mentally checked out for like a
Oh,
year and a
same,
half.
same. And I
I
feel,
don't
yeah,
I don't even remember parts of like 2021 and early 2022, because for us the pandemic like really hit
mhm.
here not quite in 2020. We sort of slid through 2020 unscathed. We got it on the back end, and but yeah, but the
Ours hit that,
stress.
yeah, ours hit that summer, and so it really picked up momentum. Like I remember it, but at the same time, I feel like it was such a blur, and I was on call 24 hours a day, and I was just holding on, by my fingernails, and my husband was doing the same here at the house. He was working from home trying to keep him homeschooled, and or public school, homeschool, whatever. um and it was just like such a nightmare. I
Mm.
think we all just kind of hunkered down, and the kids were, they were scared, and it's just, there's definitely, I know I talked to their pediatrician, this has been sometime last year, and just said, hey, what's your thought on these pandemic kiddos. It's kind of how I refer to them. You know, anybody that was still, you know, like college and below, I think of like there was a period of time where their socialization was just held still, you know, and their developmental abilities to move forward and there's a lot of fear there too. And I was like, what are your thoughts? And he goes, every single kid I see is behind in some way, whether it's education wise, emotional regulation, relationships. Like he said, none of them have progressed in milestones like they should have without fail. And he said,
Right.
I don't know that there is any way around it given the unique situation that everybody was in. You know,
Yeah.
what do you do? You know, we had to work. We did the best we could. I mean, we kept them alive. I feel like that was a good thing, you know. Um, but yeah, for sure, I feel a ton of guilt because I was busy taking care of everybody else. And my kids, I thought were okay, but they weren't okay. They were not okay. Um,
There came a point at one time when Chad was like, he goes, "Do you realize that the kids haven't left the farm in 3 months?" And I
mhm,
was like,
mhm.
"No."
Yeah,
And he's
yeah,
like, he goes, "I think we have to go somewhere and like,
yeah,
we need to, make
yeah,
contact like real life, because for us, I mean, we're all sort of homebodies anyway." And
yeah, yeah,
and I was going to work every day, and Chad, was
right,
doing his daily rounds at the store, but like the kids
right,
like weren't leaving, they
yeah,
weren't leaving to do anything.
yeah,
So I was just like, oh my gosh, so when you think about the fact that, here in rural West Texas, where there is
mhm.
not another soul for the eye to see,
Right.
that they were literally here on the farm,
They
only
really
with
were
us and the
isolated,
for
socially
3 months.
distanced.
Yeah,
Yeah,
they were
that's
adequately social. But I was terrified. Especially
yeah,
since the first big news story that came out during that time was, that nursing home in Washington just getting
yeah,
annihilated by COVID.
yeah.
I mean, I
That was
was at
horrible.
the time in DON in the nursing home, and I was like, oh my God,
Yeah,
I do not want this to happen to us.
right,
And
right.
yeah, so we were very strict and diligent about it.
Yeah, yeah, we were too. And I do know we got to, I don't know how long it was, but it was several months in, um, where said, you know, we got to start getting out of the house. Like, so we would go pick up food somewhere at a drive-through, or takeout or whatever, and just take them to the park, take them, you know, anywhere that was outside,
Yeah.
where we could at least not be around people per se. We could choose to keep our distance, but at the same time, like you got to get out, you know, like you're losing
Hmm.
it. So,
Losing my
um,
shit.
losing it, and rightfully so, to be fair, you know. And I look at my kids now, the ones that are older, you know, the one that's finishing college and versus the other two who like they had more time post COVID in school before they had to be an adult. I had one
Hmm.
graduate like the year after COVID, meaning the year it hit its peak. That next year was her senior year. And so that was kind of a nightmare. You know, they were in and out of school. Um, yeah, I mean, we did get graduation and stuff like that, which I know a lot of people didn't the previous year, but it was terrible. I don't,
Well, and I
so
know from a manager, I don't know how you feel like if you're around a lot of like students, medical students and stuff like that, but I feel like you can see it in the new grad nurses. Like you can see COVID in them for sure.
yeah,
And
yeah,
and I feel like such a crotchety old granny nurse, like, but
yeah.
you
No,
you
you
really
can,
can.
you can.
And it's just like, I don't, people are like, well, they're just not educating, and I'm just like, I don't think it was for lack of trying. I just think that everybody was
It
trying to totally
right. It was
redesign
just
their teaching model on the fly. And
yeah,
at the same time,
yeah.
these kids still, they still had to
They
go to
did,
college. They
yeah.
So
They did
yeah,
not
I
get the
try to
hands
keep that in
on.
mind.
Mm-mm. Yeah.
Yeah.
There are many times I
So
answer the
when I'm
phone and
charging,
it's a young nurse. Sorry. Go ahead. I think we paused there for somehow. Don't know how that. But yeah, there's many times I answer the phone and they're trying to call in a prescription and they have no idea. They're struggle busting hard, and I just walk through it. I'm like,
Yeah.
you tell me what you think you need to, you go ahead, and I let them, and then I'll say, okay, now here's what else I need, like a date of birth, you know, things like that. But I don't ever make fun of them on the phone because I know they're nervous probably anyway, and so I'll just say, okay, this is really what we need when you call, and I just walk them through it and they're like, okay, thanks, or whatever, and or if they call and they do a great job, I'm like, you did an awesome job. That's exactly how you're supposed to call a prescription. Because you can usually
Yeah.
tell they're hesitant. You can tell they're new. So anyway, so what are we talking about today, Heather? You want to tell our lovely audience what they've won?
I feel like, on the heels of our COVID discussion, this probably flows right in.
It does.
We're going to talk about
100% does.
religious deconstruction.
Yay.
Cheers. Yeah.
Awesome. So this would be the point in the podcast if you're listening or watching that. Yeah, we're going to talk about deconstruction. If you don't know what that means, the term is usually used or referred to deconstructing regarding faith or religious practices, things like that. So that's what we're going to be talking about. Probably going to be hurt some feelings and step on some toes. It may be even triggering for some people. I thought about that as well. Like we probably need to just be sure that's what we're about to talk about, and it's probably going to get
Right.
emotional and difficult for both of us. And if deconstruction is something you have done, or if you're on the precipice of it, or just anything remotely like that, have religious trauma in your life, that you need to be forewarned that that's what this episode and the next one is going to cover. And so this might be your time not to hang around. We want you to, but we don't want anybody to be in more pain when they're done with us than when they
Sure.
started.
Well, and I think the goal is not to just to bash people's faith, but to
Oh,
just kind of,
absolutely not.
because I don't
No, no.
feel at all that I have reached a point of faithlessness. I just feel
Mm,
like the whole focus of my
no.
faith is completely different than what it was
Yeah,
before. Yeah.
absolutely. Absolutely. And personally, I've been through at least two major deconstructions, which I didn't even know you could do that. Like,
Yeah.
once we're digging in, we'll figure that out. But, and I even felt a little the second time around, I was like, what is wrong with you? Like, are you just flippant or like superficial? What is your problem? But what do you mean because my mind almost immediately is like, oh, wait, we've done this before. You know, like, wait a minute. Wait, no, we've done this before. We've already decided what we believe in, and that's it. And then I was like, well, there's
Hmm.
not a rule around deconstruction of looking at your faith and taking it apart. You could do it every day if you wanted to. So, but
Sure.
yeah,
I mean, I've
yeah,
done it many times. I think trying to find a shoe that fit, you know?
right. Navigating faith is difficult.
Right,
It is
right.
difficult.
And I've tried
I
on a
think,
lot of shoes.
well, I mean, I think that's probably a fair statement for me. I try, I, I try on well, I think it's honestly, like you said, it's a continual thing, really. I think once you start deconstructing or once you start looking at your faith and your religious beliefs and your practices and start asking yourself some hard questions and then be willing to be open to what those answers might be, your faith will always be evolving. That's what I'm finding is that there's never a point where I'm like, okay, these are all the things I believe and this is where they are and they're not going to change. Um, I haven't found that to be true. We can talk about that later, but um, anyway. So you want to start off with a little background on like how you were raised and what your original sort of origin story faith wise was? You
So
want to do
it's
that or
kind
you
of
want me to do
like
that? You can do that.
I know I'll go. I don't feel
Yay.
like I'm probably one of those weird ones that feels like that my childhood, like upbringing centered around religion, was not the traumatic part. I will say that I
Okay.
grew up in a pretty the church that I belonged to growing up with my mom was called a United Church of Christ. It's very different from Church of Christ. It is more evangelical. It is like
Yes, it is
I don't
very
know. I
different.
don't really. yeah, it's Protestant. It's very
Hmm. Yeah.
it wasn't very strict. I guess I could say there wasn't like a lot of rules and regulations, and
Okay.
it was
Okay.
just your general, come to church and do your thing.
Sure.
But what's
Okay.
interesting about my growing up is that the church itself had an evolution when I was a child.
Oh,
So they
okay.
went from being a very kind of like a traditional based to being open and affirming, and it split our church,
I'm
honestly.
sure it did.
Um,
What year would it this?
yeah.
What time frame are you
Oh
talking about? If you were a
gosh,
kid.
it had to be in the 80s. The open and
Wow.
affirming movement among churches was relatively new,
I was going to say
and
that's incredibly progressive at that time.
it's very progressive. And so, like,
Yeah.
now I had
Good on
friends,
them.
just kind of all, yeah, friends from all walks of life. I like spent a lot of time in Catholic church.
Hmm.
Most of my friends. I grew up in St. Louis, so most of my friends were
Yeah.
Catholic, and
Yeah.
so I spent a lot of time in Catholic church, which always felt more homey to me than my own church. And I think that's mostly because having a lot of trauma growing up, the ritual of the Catholic Church
Hmm.
um,
Hmm.
really
I
spoke to
was
my
just
soul.
thinking that.
Like,
Yeah.
I loved that
Absolutely.
I knew exactly what was going to happen. There was a pre-planned thing
Yeah.
beforehand.
Yep.
Everything
Yep.
was very. So I liked that. But I
Yeah.
also had friends who were Jewish. I had friends who were, oh gosh, Mormon. So I had a very diverse like exposure. I think growing up, um, most of my religious trauma, I would say, probably came as an adult. Um,
Right. Okay.
Now, the trauma that I had when I was a child was mostly centered around, I don't really think religion. I tried to pick that apart in my brain the other night. Like, there was just a lot of uncertainty in my childhood. And I
Yeah.
always
Yeah.
rebelled against religion in the church
Hmm.
because I felt like it was this like hand of control on me, that I didn't
Hmm.
want to be dressed up in uncomfortable clothes and go to church and paraded around. And,
Right.
I've always been a questioner. Like, I want to know the nuts and bolts of things. And I feel like in that particular church that I what wasn't really like, nobody made me feel bad about myself, I guess you could say. Um,
Right. So there wasn't
I just
necessarily a lot of shame-based
no,
instruction or
no.
okay.
I mean, just the
Yeah.
normal stuff. I mean, the normal stuff that's in all of
Right.
all in
Right.
Christendom is, the pure, but
Excellent.
purity culture, I don't think really came into play until I was a young adult. So like, because that really
Hmm.
wasn't a thing. And like I said, my church like switched to being open and affirming, and for I would say
Right.
like several years there, that was like the focus was kind of
Hmm.
like a re-indoctrination, if you will.
Sure.
And so getting to see that sort of evolution when I was young, like really, really colored how I dealt with it as an adult, you know.
Hmm.
And also, I
Yeah.
moved south, and we do church a whole lot different down here
We
than we
should-
do in St. Louis.
that
So,
might be the understatement of the year right there. We do church
right.
a little
I mean,
different in the South. Just a little
even
different.
even Catholic church is way different, and they're all on the
Really?
same program. Yeah, yeah.
They
Um,
are. They're on the same schedule. It's
right,
fantastic.
they're on the
I
same
love it.
program. Like,
I
that's what I
know.
loved
I
about
get
the
it.
Catholic Church. They have everybody gets the same missalette. What we're talking about is in the paper. Like, we know
Right.
what songs we're gonna sing. It's very structured.
Right.
But even
Yeah.
even in Arkansas, Catholic Church was way different. A lot more
Um,
conservative. A lot more conservative.
I could see
So,
that based on some things that my friends have shared with me over the years that are Catholic that did not sit well with them.
hmm
And
yeah,
I was really, at the time, and still am, I was really proud of them for being able to recognize that and say, hey, that's not okay. Like, and it had nothing to do with anything really controversial. It had more to do with race and uh, cultural differences and things like that. And they're like, that's not okay. Like, no, we're not going to do that. And so I could see that being an
yeah.
issue. Yeah.
It was very different. It was very different. And I remember like I was going to church with a friend at one time, and I just kind of looked at her and I was like, man, our priest back home would have never like said, they would have never, and she was just like, really? And I'm like,
They
yeah,
would
like
never. They would never.
yeah. So
Love it.
so it's just an interesting, and I mean, I've always questioned. That's just kind of been a part of who I
Hmm.
am. I've always been, and I think the other thing that really drew me in about the Catholic Church was that it was very, like I said, ritual based. I've always been innately witchy. That's always kind of been a part of who I am. Um,
Yep.
and there's other weird things that we may get into about that later, about maybe why my religious trauma is a little different than like the next guy. But yeah, so that's kind of my church upbringing in a nutshell.
So did you go every week growing up, or did you just go some, or what was the pattern for you guys?
My mom was a religious churchgoer. She sang in the
Okay.
choir. We were practicing every Wednesday and
You had a
singing on
choir?
Sunday.
You went to a
Yeah.
Church of Christ that had a choir? Yeah, it's a
Yes.
different
Yeah.
one.
Yeah. Because, like I said, it's United Church of Christ. It's different.
Yep.
But yeah, so she was a religious churchgoer. We
Gotcha.
went every Sunday, and I often did not want to go, and the guilting that would take place because of that,
Yes.
like, you're going to make me
Yes.
look bad, like, all that kind of crap. And so I as a teenager, I made church as uncomfortable as possible for my mom. I'm like, if you're going to make me go, then I'm gonna wear what I want to wear,
Oh my gosh.
and you're not going to dress me up in your little fucking Polly Flinders bullshit. I'm not doing
Right.
that.
No gunny sack dresses for you. Huh? No Jessica McClintock in your
No.
closet with the lace stockings. Gosh. Yeah. Oh,
Right,
the
right.
itchiness. The itchiness.
Yes.
I think we could have an episode alone on the itchiness in church. As a
True.
child, the clothes we had to
Yes.
wear, they were horrible. They were so uncomfortable, but
And I've
um
always been a sensory, I mean, I have sensory
mm,
issues.
for sure. For
And
sure.
so that was always just like a nightmare for me to have to go and do all this, and like you have to act a certain
Yeah.
way, and they never wanted you to ask any questions, like
Oh
so the
no.
person,
No, no,
I
no.
would go home and like ask questions to my grandma, because my grandma would like tell me the truth. And I remember this one time I asked her, and I can't remember what it was, but she was cooking me some spaghettios at the stove. That was our love language. She was cooking me some spaghettios, and she looked at me and she goes, you know what, I don't know either, it sounds to me just like a bunch of bullshit, but we just gonna keep doing what we're doing. I'm like, okay.
I love it. Maybe she's my spirit animal.
Yeah.
Maybe your grandmother is my spirit animal. That's hilarious. I don't know. It's just a bunch of bullshit. Sometimes it feels that way. Um, so I grew up, so I was raised, viewers, just so you know, listeners, we didn't discuss this beforehand. So I don't know that Heather knows that I was raised in the Church of Christ. So not the one she
In the
went to,
actual Church of Christ.
the actual Church of Christ. Um, and let me also make it the actual one. Let me make a disclaimer of there are still many, many people that I love very much that attend that church. That didn't They don't call it a denomination. That denomination, and they are good people. So this is not about this is not about that. In fact, I left that church when I was 30, and so I'm 47 now, and I have never publicly discussed it until this point. Now, if someone took me aside and asked me, I would share with them, but I have never gone on social media. I have never, like, nothing. Even when I was writing and doing a blog and writing for uh, other Christian websites and publications and things like that, when I was doing some freelance writing, never ever did I discuss anything about that, because I do live in a small town and I was always really careful to not really step on anybody's toes. And that's not what we're doing here. But I will share my experience from my perspective. It was very difficult. I was raised in a very harsh, strict, legalistic, religious environment, both at home and then at the church. Now, the people at the church were not nearly, they were nothing like what I was experiencing at home. I need to clarify that. But that that church and their beliefs are very strict. They they believe what they believe, and you're not going to change their mind. So we were there every time the doors were open, and everything that was preached from the pulpit was practiced at home. And so that was reflected in discipline, that was reflected in day to day life. Everything we did was revolved around that. And I know that my parents believed that that was the right thing to do. And obviously, they did the best they could in some ways and not so much in others. But it was difficult. It was very suffocating. Women are not allowed to speak at all in that particular church. You are to tell your spouse or your parent or your brother what your opinion about something is or your concern, whatever that might be, and they are to then take that to the church leadership.
Mhm.
And there's no music, in that there's no musical instruments, there's no choirs. It is all a cappella singing. Nothing wrong with that. But so I had no experience whatsoever with, pianos, organs, any kind of worship music, nothing like that at all. Um, which is odd because my mother went to Ole Miss on a full vocal scholarship. So that's it's a little weird. And played the piano like a boss. Like a boss. We had one at home and she played it. Uh, but not worship music. Anyway, so I found it very suffocating when I was growing up. I was, I mean, we were taught that your works equal your faith, basically. So everything that you do matters. And I think that as far as character counting, that's important. But it also meant that, you know, church attendance was mandatory, church participation in activities was mandatory. That everything was very expected of you. And there was a lot of guilt and a lot of shame. Sex was absolutely not a discussion that ever happened. It was off the table, period, end of story. If you got pregnant out of wedlock, that is such an old term, but I'm just telling you that's the way it was said. The the girls would have to go to the front of the church, and they weren't allowed to speak, but they could speak to the minister, who would then relay to the congregation their sin, and that they were coming forward to being asked to be forgiven of this sin, and that they were going to have this baby. I found all that really unsettling, I think I would say, as a young person, because quite often it was only the girl. Um, if the boy was still involved in the picture pretty heavily, he might go up there. But if it was someone from outside the church, very rarely did you ever see them bear the stigma that the female in the relationship did. It was really, I don't know, that was tough as a kid to watch people go through that. And honestly, anyone who did anything. I mean, if you had an affair, if you were an alcoholic who was maybe trying to go to rehab, anything, anything outside the square box, right? Any major sin was going to have to be, you were going to have to repent in front of the entire church. So everybody was going to know about it. And
Gee.
I saw people disfellowshipped. If you don't know what that word means, disfellowship is where a person is cast out from the congregation. It's very similar to shunning, that in that respect, like they can't tell you not to come to church, but they'll tell you you're no longer a member of the congregation. So you can show up if you want to, but you're not going to be who would want to. I have seen people disfellowshipped. It was it was a lot. I mean, if it tells you anything, when I went to college, I continued to get up at like 5 a.m. and study my Bible for like an hour before I had to get ready for college, for school, because I thought that was what I was,
Yeah, see,
because
studying the Bible was
studying,
my undoing.
Mine too, actually. Funny you should say that. As it was mine. But I mean, I did that for years and years and years because they don't preach necessarily you have to do that. That was, but you do have to study. They do still, their big term is the quoting of the scripture, study to show thyself approved. And so being able to, quote scripture and all that sort of thing is very, there's works, a lot of works that need to be seen and be counted. And so, yeah, it was not good for me. That combined with a traumatic childhood at home was the perfect stage. The fact that I am not like on the street, unhoused, and an addict myself of God knows what. Even my therapist is like, it's a miracle. It's a miracle, and I believe that. I mean, because
Right.
I was I was
Yeah.
so like for exploitation by anybody or anything, and had I just had one interaction with the wrong person, or I really think it could have been really bad for me. I'm really thankful that I met the people I met and, ended up doing other things. But I would say that was difficult. So I rocked on there till I was about 30. And then I decided I was going to go be a Baptist. And so did that. We'll talk about that later. So I've got I've got experiences in both pools there. Very, very legalistic to, where there's no such thing as um, being secure in your faith. There is no such thing as that. You cannot be
Yeah.
secure in your faith. So you live your life every moment of every day possibly worried, I guess, that you could die and go to hell. So as a person who's neurodivergent, I'm gonna let you guess what that was like for 30 years, to wake up every day and scramble. So to then go to the other end of the pool, which is once saved, always saved, which is sort of not just a Baptist mantra, but that is a statement that can be used to refer to them. Um, to now, I don't go anywhere but my living room. So if that
I
if
mean,
that
I do
tells
go
you,
out to the pasture. I mean, I go out to the pasture.
yeah,
That's
for
church,
sure, for sure. I meet God in a
And
lot
I
of
do
places.
find too. I think it's really interesting too. Like, having moved from the north to the south, um,
Mm-hmm.
that church is very much a social construct in the South too. Like, it's
Yes.
even in this small town.
Yes.
You're we're in St. Louis. We were all judged by where we went to high school. If you have ever met a St. Louis person, and you're speaking to another St. Louis person, once they figure out that you're from the same town, the first question they will ask you is, where did you go to high school? Because that kind of like
Really.
it says a lot
Wow.
about you. Like, it says a lot about
Gotcha.
where you
Social
were.
stratosphere.
um yes,
Got it.
and so like, and I
Got it.
feel like in the South that's more a church thing. Like,
It
it's very
absolutely
important
is.
where you go to church. And
It is. It is. It is in my town still.
yeah,
I can
and
promise you.
having, yeah, and having
Hmm.
not grown up from birth to the time I left the house in a church that was like that, it was
Bit
very
shocking.
shocking.
Hmm.
Like, it was
Yeah,
shocking
it is.
the amount of um
Yeah.
like the picking apart of the other churches, like, oh, we don't do that here,
Yes.
very. And
Yes.
like, so for me,
Yes. Yes.
as a neurodivergent
Almost
woman
an
as well,
elitism type.
like,
Yeah.
yeah, it was very strange to get into
Yeah.
that, and kind of start seriously like pursuing um Christianity as a a newly married adult with a brand new baby. And then
Yeah.
going into this environment, having lived in a big city where it's very multicultural, lots of different kinds of exposure, to like
Yeah.
really having to go, okay, where can I go that isn't going to try to convince me that I'm going to hell by the end of the service every day? um and you
Um,
even, I mean,
Probably
I
not the
even
one I
felt
went
like,
to.
right, I even felt like you got a lot of hellfire and brimstone even at the Catholic Church, and I was like, dang.
That's a Southern thing,
Like,
I think. I
It
think
was,
so.
and like I said, being in the Catholic Church, like I was never, I mean, I know technically, like, because I'm not like a cradle Catholic, I wasn't supposed to, take communion or anything like that, but I was
Right.
never asked
Right.
not to. And as long as I knew all the signs
Right.
and
And you
symbols,
won't be, I
I
don't think.
blended in.
Yeah.
And
Right.
I never, from that point when, the church that I was going to then, it was very it was still very open. Like I don't ever
Hmm.
remember a priest from the pulpit talking about being gay. Never. Like I just don't remember that. I knew at
Yeah.
that time it wasn't like okay, but
Right.
it was never preached about. Like I had never heard that kind of rhetoric at all until I
Wow.
moved to the South.
So that had to have just blown your mind apart, because that's a regular occurrence. If you are not from the South, or have not lived here and not gone to church, a very large majority are still going to not be open and affirming. One of the reasons we don't go to church right now is because I can't find one in a drivable distance. I cannot find a church within a drivable distance at this moment that I know of. Obviously, I could be wrong. I have looked and have
Yeah.
asked. And you also have to be careful about asking, because people get real offended that are not open and affirming to everyone. If you ask that are you guys? And that's a whole can of worms sometimes. So you have to kind of sneak around and find out. But I can't find a church, and I've reached the point in my life where I'm like, I'm not going to a church that isn't going to open their arms and love everybody. Just not going to do it. Just not going to
Yeah,
do it. And I don't think
I
I'm
feel
going to hell
exactly.
for it. I'm not.
Yeah.
Mm-mm.
I'm not gonna,
Sorry.
I think the thing with me is that I got to the point where I didn't feel like I was doing my kids any favors by having
Mm-hmm.
to undo
Mm-hmm.
what was done
Yep.
during the service on the way home from
Yep.
church.
Yes. That
And
did happen to us as well. Yes. Mm-hmm.
and so it was just like, I got to the point where there was such, and I will say, like, for me the deconstruction really began um
Mm-hmm.
when Obama ran for president,
I could see that.
because
I could see
you
that.
know living living where I was living at the time,
Mm-hmm.
which was in Little Rock or
Mm-hmm.
aroundabouts, Arkansas,
Right. Central Arkansas.
Central Arkansas. I was not informed before, because I married my first husband. He was in the military. We got stationed at Little Rock Air Force Base,
Mm-hmm.
and I was not informed before I moved here that Arkansas is like the KKK capital of the world. Okay, I was not. Nobody sent me a memo, right?
But let me just say this on behalf of all Southern mothers everywhere. Bless your heart.
Hmm.
Bless your heart. So if you're
So
out there, folks, like there's a lot of people in Arkansas that would love for you to visit. We would love for you to come here and visit. But I would like you to be not Heather and show up uninformed
right.
and be
So
blindsided
I
by the fact that we still have very active KKK chapters and just neo-Nazi crazy town places. We
yeah,
just do.
and
We just do.
it's like, and I like had a friend in high school who like dabbled around with the Nazi stuff, and I really like, and we're good friends now. We're like, we're still tight, but there was a period in her life where she was kind of into that, and
Right.
we like completely broke ranks, and I didn't see her for
Yeah.
several
That's
years
a
because I
non-negotiable.
was like,
That
that's
is a
just not where I
non-negotiable.
am now.
Nope. Mm-mm. I'll walk with
Yeah,
you a lot
and
of
so
places.
like,
Not there. Yeah,
right. Um,
absolutely.
we so when I remember my very first, like, I was pregnant with my first child, and I was 19 years old, and we were on
You were
WIG
a
because he was an airman and
baby.
we were horse certified. I was a baby,
You were a baby.
and so
A baby having a
I
baby.
went to the Good Kroger in yeah, I went to the Good Kroger in Cabot, Arkansas. Okay. And they were like setting some stuff up in the parking lot when I went into the store, and I wasn't really paying attention. I went in there, got my stuff, I came out. And what was
Mhm.
happening in the parking lot at that time was a KKK rally.
Nice.
And
Nice.
I stopped
Did you
because
have a
I
moment?
had heard,
Did you?
I
Knock the wind out of you.
well, first I just looked around and I was just like, and I noticed for the
Yeah.
first time that there were no people of color in Cabot,
Yeah.
and I was kind of like,
Yep.
okay,
Yep.
this is new. And so I
Yes.
stayed because I was like, surely this is like a play or something, like maybe this is, I don't know, but no, I
Did
mean,
you think it was a
it's in broad
reenactment
daylight.
of like the 1960s civil rights movement in the parking lot at Kroger? You're like, this can't be real.
Right.
This has to be
I was
cosplay.
like,
No, it's not.
this can't be
Sadly.
and
Oh
so
my gosh. Poor
how that
thing.
ties into where we are today, I'm going to get to that in a second, but they were
I
talking
know.
about basically how
Oh,
their plan, this guy who was speaking, some grand
they
wizard
had a
dude who was
plan.
speaking, was like
God.
was that they were going to infiltrate the government. That was their plan, and they were laying out for their people how they were going to do that. And I will
Wow.
say that names like the Heritage Foundation were thrown around. There
Not
were
shocked.
some, there were some different organizations that were supportive of their movement, and how
Mhm.
basically that they were going to return everyday life in the United States back to where women knew their place and people of color also knew theirs. And I just stood there during this whole thing with my grocery sacks, like, where the fuck have I moved to?
Yeah. Yeah.
So, and to put that in some
Yeah.
perspective, so like, I in high
Yeah.
school was kept alive solely by the grace of Mr. Ivory Travis, who was my black band director, who acted as my surrogate father, and is probably the only reason I am still alive today, because
Yeah.
I was dumb as hell. And I mean,
Yeah.
I did some real reckless shit. And so like, this love that I have for people of
Right.
color in my heart, and I just could not imagine. And so I went home and I remember telling my husband, and he was just like, "You're lying. Like that can't be true." And I'm just like, "No, for real, yo, like it was for real." And then it was like on the news later.
Ask
And
around.
so I was like, where the
Wow.
hell have we moved to? This is terrible.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
yeah, so
Sadly,
crazy
that
how they were.
there's, mhm. Well, churches are still, I would say, still unofficially segregated. I mean, they're not officially segregated in the sense that like it's not in the newspaper, but it's every church just about that I've gone to has had very few people of color, and I have to think that's because they don't feel welcome in those places. Which breaks my heart. But I think that just goes back to the entire process of deconstruction and asking yourself, if what are my core values and tenets of my faith? What are those? Because that's really what deconstruction is. You're looking at what you're being told and taught and comparing it to what you can research through, through materials, the Bible, concordance, etc., and through your own prayer life and seeking, searching, asking God to reveal himself in different ways, whatever that looks like for you. But you're comparing those two things, and you're finding that this institution is falling far short of what the Bible says and what Jesus lived.
Mhm.
I mean, that's what it has turned out for me. Um, so the first time that I went through deconstruction, at the time we'd had a minister change, which is not uncommon. It's kind of whichever way the wind blows in the South. I don't know if that's how it is up north or out
Mhm.
west or east. But sadly, it can very much be, how does the congregation feel about you and whether you have a job or not. And so if they don't
Yeah.
like what you're saying, whether it's biblically true or not, I've seen people run out of a church when they were standing in biblical truth because the people in leadership did not like what they had to say. Even though that's what the
Mhm.
Bible said, they still didn't like it. And they just ran them out of a job. It's real easy to do in some churches. They just have a leadership meeting and they have a vote of confidence or whatever they want to call it. They call it different things in different places. And you go to church the next week and you don't have a minister and they're looking for a new one. And they're going to find somebody and put somebody in there that is going to follow what church leadership wants. And so at the time we'd had a minister change. There was nothing wrong with the gentleman. I'm sure he was a lovely man. I don't know really. Um, I did not have an immediate dislike to him. It had nothing to do with him personally, but his preaching style was 150% hellfire and brimstone every Sunday. And I was like,
Mm-hmm.
this is not the gospel. The gospel's the good news. Like, yes, we can talk about hell, we can talk about Revelation, we can pick it all apart. But we can't do it every Sunday and every Wednesday and Sunday night, and that's what we were getting 3 times a week. And that's what our kids were getting 3 times a week, when we were going. They were hearing this from the
Mm-hmm.
pulpit. And so I thought, I think I'm going to do some studying. And so and folks, if you're out there and you're like, oh yeah, I study, I go to church. No, no, no. If you truly deconstruct, I think you spend a lot of time looking at
Mm-hmm.
because the church you go to, whether you are Church of Christ, Catholic, Mormon, does not matter. Every single denomination has their tenets of faith. They have their ride or die rules, and you know that. And if
Mm-hmm.
you've been
Yeah.
raised in that church, you for sure know that. So I knew exactly what I wanted to look at or needed to look at. And just so happened right around that time, Max Lucado had come out with a book, John 3:16, and have always read his books. My first red flag was when all of his books were removed out of our church library because he was too liberal. This was in the, yeah,
Max
this was
Lucado.
in Max Lucado. Max Lucado. Max, if you ever listen to this, I'm sorry for the language. It's not your fault. You're an amazing, you're an amazing writer. Um, but yeah, so that book had just come out, and I've read all of his books, and did many. He used to write Bible studies too. Did all of that, like, you know. I wasn't a believer in him, but his teaching style and writing style was very easy to understand, and it was very easy to go and follow up and read for yourself and find the truth behind what he said. And that's what I'm always looking for.
Mm-hmm.
I'm looking for that truth. And so I sat down and just started like writing out like these are the things the church believes. And I'm going to go find these scriptures and I'm going to study and I'm going to pray about it. And God's just going to do his work. And that was it. Like I did not discuss it with anybody. So I would get the girls in bed at about 8:30 every night. So when I only had 2 kids. And I would sit down and study till 10 or 10:30. And I did that for about 4 or 5 months. And during that time, I took that book, John 3:16, and I picked it apart. And I do mean dissected it word for word.
Mm-hmm.
And when I got to the end of that time period, I was just like, I don't believe these things anymore. And I'm not going to go into what those particular things are, just out of respect for the people who still go there. But based
Mm-hmm.
on the things that I read, no, I'm sorry. I just couldn't do it. And so at the time, I was still teaching like the second or 2-year-olds. I was teaching toddler preschool age, little Sunday school that summer. And I taught the last Sunday of that summer session, and we went right out there, and the Hellfire and Brimstone started again. And I just remember looking at Steve and gathering up some stuff, and he's like, "What's going on?" And I was like, "I'm leaving. I'm leaving. I'm not staying here. I can't do this anymore." And I said, "You can stay or you can go with me. It's totally up to you." And he said, "I'm going with you." So I walked out of that church. My one child was 4.5, 5 years old. The other one was still in a carrier, and went right across town and walked into the middle of a church service somewhere else. And and it was rough. It was rough. If you have never publicly deconstructed, or even quietly, because mine was really quietly, I didn't say anything to anybody else. I
Mm-hmm.
just left and didn't come back. And my parents went to church with me. They didn't speak to me for about 3 months. Um, I was shunned from that church. There are still people, it's the first time I've said this publicly as well. There are still people in that church that will not speak to me. And it's been almost 18 years. Um, it hurt for a really, really, really long time. And now it's not that it doesn't hurt, but it's just, to me, it's so incredibly sad because I work in a public setting. So I'm their pharmacist and they won't speak to me. They will speak to the other pharmacist that's also Baptist or Methodist or whatever, but they won't speak to me. They have seen me at public outings. They've seen me at the local festival they have here and literally walked right past, made eye contact, walked right past me without speaking, turned around in a grocery store aisle to avoid speaking to me. Um, so yeah, a shunning is a real thing. I don't
Mm-hmm.
know if they got together and discussed it, and they all decided, or I don't know what happened, to be honest with you, because I was also never approached, never called. I could count on one hand the number of people from that congregation that I was raised in from the time I was a little girl, that called and checked on me and said, "Are you okay? Is everything okay?" Because everything was not okay. And to those people, I asked questions and they could not answer them.
Yeah.
They could not answer them. And so it was
I
rough.
think,
It was rough.
yeah, that's, and like for me, I kind of went the opposite, so I kind of went the opposite direction. Like, so I come from this sort of progressive upbringing,
Right.
moved to the South, and at the same time, because I had just become a mom and I had
Mm,
a very traumatic childhood, and
right.
I was in a place where I was very vulnerable to
Sure.
needing some kind of system to help
And
me
support. Hmm.
unpack. This was the first time I'd like been, we were newly married. Both my ex-husband and I would say, did not have a conventional upbringing. I'm not going to air his dirty laundry,
I
but
understand. I
both of
understand. Yeah.
us, both of us had some bullshit in our
Sure.
lives.
Sure.
And for me it was a lot of like, there was a lot of sexual trauma, there was a lot of addiction issues, there was a lot of
Mm,
violence. For
sure.
him a little bit different, but just really wanting to, here I have this baby, and my number one goal as a human at this point is to make sure that she doesn't grow up like I did, right?
Yeah.
So I
Yeah.
was looking to do whatever I could to be extreme in the opposite direction of every kind of way that I grew up in. And so
Right.
I met a person, and she led me and my husband to this church, and it was a, oh gosh, what do you call that? It's I guess it was a maybe Pentecostal ish type church. Okay,
Okay.
so like
Hmm.
I've never been any place where folks fall on the floor and speak in tongues.
That's Pentecostal. Yes.
You know, I've never been any
Yeah.
place like that.
Yeah.
I've never been any place with that kind of charismatic like delivery of
Right.
things. And
Yes. Yeah.
I am ashamed to say that it impressed me, because I was like, okay, this is
I don't think
different.
you have to be,
This
you
is,
don't have to be ashamed of that. It can be very
yeah,
emotional and very, and that's something too we can talk about later, is how easy it is to manipulate people when they're in those spaces and you get everybody worked up emotionally. It's very
right.
easy. You're very open
And
to that.
right. And so I fell into that 10 toes down. And it really, I think in a way, well, it didn't completely contribute to like the end of my marriage, but because I had these very like set in stone, immovable beliefs now, that
Right. Right.
it made it very difficult for me to, well, for one, it just pushed my trauma down to the bottom of the barrel, because for one, the
Oh,
kind of stuff
sure.
that I had gone through, you don't talk about.
Nope.
That's not what
Nope.
you talk about.
Nope.
You are that's shameful, and you're unclean, and we don't talk
Yep.
about these kinds of things.
Yep.
And it was very, like, very strict. And so, but I felt for the first time sort of like moved spiritually. I won't say that I ever really
Mm-hmm.
felt like that before. And so it felt very real to me.
Mm-hmm.
And um and then So I've kind of been through some waves. So like then we had an incident happen in the youth group.
Yeah.
And I was pretty involved with the youth at that time. And we
Isn't
had an
it
incident.
always an
Daisy was the
incident with the youth group?
incident with the youth group, right?
It's
And
always.
so basically, what happened was we had a praise team, and the drummer in the praise team had an affair with a 14-year-old girl.
Nice.
And
Yeah,
he was
that's great.
married, and his wife was
Ugh.
pregnant, and she was on the praise
Oh,
team, and it was a big deal. And I will
oh
tell you that they
God.
skewered that child, that they made
The
her out to be
14-year-old?
the
Oh
biggest
yeah, she was the
Jezebel. Yeah.
Jezebel. I could have told you. Yep. Yep. She was the
And I was
scapegoat.
just like,
100%.
and so
Yeah.
I was horrified by that. And so after that happened, I
You were probably a little
left
triggered too,
that
don't you think?
church.
A little
Oh,
bit.
very much,
A
because
little
I
bit
was like,
triggered.
oh, so
All that.
this is why we don't
Hmm.
talk about it, because we condone it.
That's right. Yep. Because you'd shove it way down and then you see that
Yeah.
happen and you're like, whoa, 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 whoa. Yeah.
Yeah. I'm
Yeah.
like, what the hell? And so
Yeah.
I was like, I was trying to give them an opportunity to like make it right.
Sure. Sure.
And
You've got to give people
I was
time and space to see if they're what they're going to do. You can't rush to judgment
right.
till all the dust settles.
And
Yeah. No, I
so
agree.
he ended up
Yeah.
going to jail. He and his wife got a
As he should have.
divorce. And
Good
then
for her.
like but they kept like, they were like, oh, we just need to pray for him, we just need to do this, and they just kept making it a thing during the church. Finally I was just like, I can't do this anymore, so
Pray,
we left the
pray
church.
for him for what? He's sick. I mean,
Yeah,
yeah,
and I was just
but
like, what
but he's
about the
not going to get
girl who's
better.
right, what
What
about the
about
girl whose
her?
life you just ruined,
He
you
just
know, like, are
right.
we gonna, yeah, you know, we should have been throwing baby showers for her and supporting her in the best way possible because she got pregnant. And so it was just really a very ugly thing. So
Very ugly, very
we ended
public.
up
Yeah.
leaving, and then my marriage hit the rocks. Um and was very much
As they do
trying to like,
sometimes.
mm-hmm, very much trying to do all the things that I could possibly think of to do to keep this
Sure.
marriage going, because by now I'm very heavily indoctrinated that if we get a divorce, it's my fault, no matter what he's doing. Right.
Yep. It's your fault and you're
So,
going to hell. Let's add that little
right.
topper on there too. Yeah.
And
Hmm.
so I
Yeah.
convinced him. I had
Yeah. Sounds very
ran
familiar.
into the pastor's wife, and had kind of like, I was having a day, and I'd ran into the pastor's wife, and we hadn't been for several months by this time.
Hmm.
And I kind of told her what was going on, and of course she was like, you need to, you know, come back to church, you know, come get your husband, and
Everything is
you know, come
always come
talk to
back
the
to church.
pastor.
Hmm.
And so I went and I talked to the pastor, and I convinced my ex-husband to come to church with me, you know, like, you know, because I was just like, you know, if we're going to work on this, like, I really feel like, you know,
Sure.
maybe things were better when we were
Maybe
in
a
church.
family. Hmm.
Right. And so we went back to church, and the pastor used what I had told him in confidence in his sermon. And effectively, that Sunday ended my marriage.
No shit, Sherlock.
So
What the
I was
heck?
like, I was so, I mean, I was so, like, it wasn't that he was saying my name or any of that kind of stuff, but the
No,
things that
but
he
your
was
husband, then
saying.
your husband knew that you had gone to speak to someone. Like
Right.
that's like violating HIPAA. It's a no-fly zone, guys. You don't do it.
And
You just don't
yeah,
do
so
it.
I went to talk to him after that, and he gave me a copy of, I'll never forget this, that stupid fucking book, Power of a Praying Wife.
I knew that's what you were gonna say. I knew it. I knew it. I knew it. I almost ruined it. I knew that's what you were gonna say. Oh,
And
I've
I
read
was
that
just
book.
like, bitch, I've been praying, you know, like, what do you think? It's like, I've been trying to, you literally just like served me up on an altar here. And
Because they want it to be your fault. It can never
yes,
be the man's fault. And let's be clear, we are not man bashing here.
no.
We are saying that there is a systemic problem in the church with trying to quote unquote keep women in their place.
Mm-hmm.
And trust me, I can quote all the scriptures that anybody's going to email us or comment, and that's just fine. You go right ahead with that. You go right ahead if it makes you feel better. But I'm going
People,
to
you
point
know,
out that Jesus never treated women the way that the men in the church, the way that I have seen and experienced at the hands of the men in the church, including my own family,
Right.
including my own family. I have
Yeah.
never, ever seen anything in Jesus's life for the disrespect, the amount of responsibility that they put on women for raising children, educating children, keeping them healthy, nursing, everything. Everything is the female's responsibility, and the man's responsibility is to lead the household. Well, doing what exactly? Because we're doing all the work.
Well,
You
yeah,
lead
and there
by
isn't really,
example.
yeah, and there isn't really a whole lot of guidance on that. Like, other than your man's supposed to come home and lead Bible study, like what else is he supposed to be doing? Because that's like the only thing they seem to be concerned about.
I can tell
And
you
and
right
so
now, my husband would rather walk across broken glass than come home after work and lead a Bible study. That does not mean he doesn't believe in God, doesn't believe in heaven or hell, and is going to. It doesn't. That is nonsense. We have got to look at things through a cultural lens when we are
mhm.
reading the Bible.
Yeah.
It
Yeah.
just, you have to,
Well,
things have changed.
and when
They have
you are
changed.
like we are, independent thinkers, the
I
patriarchy
think they
becomes very
officially,
uncomfortable.
I think they officially, I think we're officially labeled hellraisers at this point. I don't even think independent thinkers is what they're thinking at all when they think of us. They're like
Right.
troublemaker. You are a troublemaker. We would have strung you up in Salem. You would have.
Right.
1,000%. I would have had a noose around my neck because I'm not going to go down without saying what's right and what's wrong. And if it's to a
Right.
man, it's to a man. If it's to a person of faith that's also a man, that's what it's going to be. Um, I'm of the opinion that I am not lesser because I am female.
Right.
We are all image bearers. We all bear the
Yeah.
image of God. So I have that same, if we're going to believe in this great being, if that's our choice, and we're going to look at these words that are written, we are all image bearers, and we all carry that sort of, I don't know if you want to call it spiritual DNA or whatever you want to refer to it as, but we are all made in His image, and that means
Yeah.
that we're all the same, male, female, Gentile, Jew. I mean, the Scripture tells us that too. So
Mhm.
I just have a real problem.
Yeah. And so like my marriage ended. I left church and didn't go back for a very long time. I had people
I
who had
don't know that I
invited
would have
me,
ever gone back after that. I don't know that I
and the
would have.
minute I would start to hear the submit to your wife, or your wife submit to your
Send it to your
husband, any
husband.
of that kind of stuff in church, I was out. Like, I went
Bye.
several different churches
Bye.
with people, but I would, if it was a pastor that I felt I could have a conversation with, like, I would go attempt
Mhm.
to have a conversation about, like,
Sure.
hey,
Sure.
in my
Mhm.
little neurodivergent quest for understanding, I have picked
Right.
this apart, and this is what I have come to. And what are your thoughts, feelings, opinions about this? And why do you
Right.
think that this makes sense? And why do you think that this particular story? Because the problem that I found was that we were cherry picking little pieces of stories to mean one thing.
Yes.
When you
Yes.
actually went back and you read what was
Mm-hmm.
actually happening in the whole passage, those
Yep.
things did not
Context.
uphold the
Yep. Nope.
principle that you were using
No.
for them. And my
They
favorite
don't.
example
Yeah.
of this
Mm-mm.
is Lot's story. And so, we get this whole, like, don't be, the whole sexual impropriety thing from Sodom and
Right.
Gomorrah. And it's, Sodom and
Right.
Gomorrah is why you can't be gay and why you can't be this and why you can't be that. But let's talk about what else happens in that story. So Lot leaves. His wife looks
Mhm.
back, turns into a pillar of salt. His daughters are terrified because they've just witnessed, like, this people trying to
Right.
slay these angels and all this other kind of stuff. Now they've been excommunicated from their homes. They're worried about their future. So what do? They get their father drunk and they sleep with him so that they
Mhm.
can become pregnant and therefore
Mhm.
fall under their father's protection and not be worried about being outcast as a society. Now, please
Right.
explain to me, because maybe I'm dull, how that story is the upholding scripture for don't be gay.
I mean, you have a point. It's a
Make it
valid
make
point.
sense.
It's a valid,
Make
it's
it make sense.
a valid point, people. It's a valid point. The fact that the cultural society then um, was that a female had to be under the protection of a male relative. Period.
Mm-hmm.
If you didn't have one, I mean, you were you were vulnerable in the worst possible way. So you needed a brother, a cousin, an uncle, a dad, somebody to take you in. That was a very real
Mm-hmm.
thing. And so,
Yes.
yeah, I mean, the story's gross. Let's just be real about it. The story is gross. It is. But there's a
Yeah.
lot of things in the Bible that are gross. A lot.
Right. And
A whole
the
lot.
other one too that talks about how, like, women, like women like securing your place and marrying the right person and equally yoked, all that stuff, and about you got to wait for your
Oh,
Boaz.
yes.
And I'm
Oh,
just
yeah.
like,
Yeah.
God,
Yeah. That story, can I
like,
tell that one? Because that's one of my
yes.
favorites. Okay. So, so this is how bad it was, y'all. Okay. So Ruth in the Bible loses her spouse. He dies. And she is with her mother-in-law. And normally when that happened back then, you would go back home to your own family. And she didn't want
Right.
to do that. She didn't want to leave. She was still young enough to have children. And her mother-in-law even said, like, you need to go back to your people. And she said, no, I'm not going to leave you, which I thought was, that's the real love story, if you want me to tell you. And I'm not
Right.
insinuating from that anything, any kind of romantic love. I'm just saying that was the real love story and devotion of family love, was for Ruth to say, I'm not leaving you, because Naomi had actually lost both of her sons and her husband. She had no protection. She was
Mm-hmm.
going to be, I mean, she was out. And so the story moves along and they find out they have a relative named Boaz. And there's this whole, they're bringing in the wheat and they're, beating it and doing all that stuff. There's the festival type thing. And one of the things that you can do is, if you want to claim a man, is during this time when they're asleep, you can go in there and pull back their covers and quote unquote get at their feet and cover yourself with their covering to indicate that you want to be married to them, or that you want them to take you under their protection in that way. And, when the story is told, it's told like it's this big romance, like, well, he was like, Boaz is described as an upstanding person of character. Nobody's saying he wasn't, but it cracks me up because I was like, y'all, that was a booty call. Yeah, that was her. That was 100%. And I'm sure somebody listening to this is like, that's too far.
Well,
But think about it.
and
That's
let's talk
exactly what
about
it
just
was. She was
the
letting him
circulating
know, like, hey,
yeah,
the what?
and the circulating context is that she
Yeah,
was
yeah.
gathering the wheat, that she wasn't
Yes,
allowed
yes.
to participate
No.
in the
Mm-mm.
festivities, but because they were starving, she was allowed,
Mm-hmm.
after they were all done, to go pick up what was extra. So here's this
Behind.
woman that's
Yes.
essentially begging, like they're
Yes.
homeless,
Yes.
right?
Yes. They are
And
living in like a
let's
little
think about
cave
that
or
for a
something.
second.
Yeah.
As a
Yes.
woman, if you're
Yes.
homeless and the only way that you can find some protection is to go lay in a bed with a man you don't know, today they throw people in jail for that. It's called
Yes.
prostitution.
That's right. Mhm. I'm still of the belief, like, I think I was really, really grown, like really adult, had some kids already, and reread that story one night and thought, she didn't just lay at his feet. I know that's what the writer said, but that is not what happened. There's no way. I know people. I've been married long enough to know men, and there is no way she stayed at his feet, because the Bible also talks about how attractive she was and how beautiful she was. And she was, very well liked. And Boaz was intentionally leaving stuff. He went to his workers and said, like, I'm going to leave this, or I want you guys to leave extra for Ruth and Naomi. So he was aware of her. So no, I don't think
Hmm.
she laid it this week. But
No.
that whole needing a mantle of protection, that doesn't, I'm sorry, folks, and I know this is not going to sit well with a lot of people. The men of today have, for the most part, have not inspired any sort of level of trust that I would allow them to have complete control over my life. And
Yeah.
that's coming from somebody who has been married for 20, almost 28 years to a rock star of a man who is kind
Same.
and gentle and protective and has, like, he wouldn't hurt a hair on my head.
Right.
But unfortunately, I was raised by someone who did. And I have
Hmm.
also had 4+ decades to witness what men in general do. So you're
Yeah.
asking us to trust everything that we are and have to a man. I wouldn't do it for a woman either. I mean, I just
Nuh-uh,
wouldn't.
sister.
Not there's no way. So I and I didn't raise my daughters to do that. Our statement in this home is husbands and trust funds, they sometimes run out. So you better be able to make your own way. And that
Yep.
sadly, that's the way it is. And I know the church wants it to be, but you can trust me and like you have to put your trust in it. No, I don't. I absolutely do not. Jesus trusted y'all too.
But there's no accountability in the church for men.
No,
And that's the
absolutely
thing
not.
that makes it so
Absolutely not.
gross is that, like,
Yes.
that guy, I mean, yeah, he suffered from the first church accountability from the legal system, but he still
Right.
very much
But
didn't
not the,
suffer
mm-mm,
accountability from the church system. In
mm-mm,
their
no.
opinion,
And I've,
he made a little
nope.
mistake and he was
Yep.
forgiven and it was fine and
Yep.
we're going to do,
Yep.
but
And
that's from
I know that we both have seen that over and over and over again, like countless
yes.
times, countless times.
Sure.
And I encourage anyone who's listening, if you're still with us, if we haven't offended,
If we haven't
if we
scared you
haven't,
off.
if we haven't stepped on your toes so hard to break them yet this episode,
Yeah.
to think about if you are a churchgoer, how many times you've witnessed a man in the church do something, whether it's sexual or not, but you know that it has come forth. I mean, embezzlement, I've seen embezzlement and they still get to come to, like, all sorts of things that people have done, but specifically men, and they are forgiven. He
Well,
just
I
couldn't help
mean, let's
himself,
just take a
you
look
know.
at good old Bill Clinton. I believe in a place called Hope. I mean, gets a slob job under the desk of the Oval, and
Do,
and
do you know
his
my daddy
pastor
wouldn't
from
even
his
shake?
hometown comes up to make sure that he's taking prayer time, and it's turned into this whole, like, oh, he made a mistake, and like Bill Clinton
Girl,
hadn't
girl, I can
always
make you a
been.
short list. I can make you a short list of people he made a mistake with that still live in the zip code. I said it.
I
I
know a
did.
couple of them personally.
I did. Same. Same. I do. And I don't, I mean, I'm not going to say it and I'm not going to tell it. That's not my story to tell. But
Right.
like, yeah, yeah. And
Yeah.
he's a very charismatic individual, a highly intelligent man, highly
Very,
intelligent
very.
man. Um, but he has a little bit of an issue. And
Hmm.
sadly, the current administration, same thing. Like, there's no way that I'm going to trust someone, especially in today's time, that's a
Yeah.
man, to be the head of myself, body and
No.
soul. Like, that's
Hmm.
not happening. That's just not
Yeah.
happening.
Well,
So
and I
I think
mean, I think culturally, I mean, even just culturally, there's not
hmm
as many consequences for men for making mistakes as there are for women.
of course not.
And,
Of course not. My husband calls it
that's,
failing up. Have you
yeah.
heard that term?
Yeah.
That's what Stephen, my husband, refers it to, and refers to it as. And I get tickled because he's every bit as capable of spotting that. It comes up a lot around our house when these people in positions of power, whether it be on a federal, state, or even just local level, people we happen to know, and
Hmm.
something occurs and they have to be shuffled around, and he'll be like, well, they failed up. Now they're making
Yeah.
more money and they have a different title. They're not in that office doing that thing, but a woman, I mean, let's be real. If a female had gone into the Oval Office like Elon Musk did with his toddler and allowed that toddler to speak in the Oval Office to the president the way that that child did, and to show up casually dressed in the Oval Office, she would have been skewered and lit on fire on the East Lawn.
Well, I mean, let's just
So
take a
there were
little
no
look at
consequences.
what happened to Monica Lewinsky.
Oh, God bless America. That
I
was
mean, have
awful.
you listened to her podcast?
Awful.
If people
I
who are
have
not
not,
on,
but I have heard
sh
that it's
I
pretty
want to
good.
say,
Yeah.
was she on? She was on Call Her Daddy, which of course is one of my favorite.
Yeah.
Hey Alex,
Yeah.
if you're listening to little old me, I love your show. But she was on Call Her Daddy, and I
Yeah.
listened to that podcast, and even today, like I listened to her TED Talk several years ago where she talked about like her whole experience with that and being young and being an intern and being and here
I
the most
mean,
powerful man in the world is
exactly.
beckoning
The
to you,
most, yes. Yes.
and how persuasive that they can be,
Hmm.
and then
Hmm.
he gets reelected
Yeah.
and her life is over.
Right. Right. Right.
And so it's just kind of like that's such an unfair consequence, and
Well, and
she
that
was
could,
like, and she became the Jezebel, not the
yep.
man who was
No,
responsible for the free world, not
no,
him.
no.
She
But we
must
saw
have
that
worn
with,
a skirt and you know
right. But we saw that with Anita Hill. We saw it with,
hmm
oh gosh, and this was when I was a little kid. The gentleman that was a general, and there was like a photo of some woman sitting on his lap, and I can't even think of her
oh,
name. I can see
I
his
can't.
face, but
Yeah,
that was Oliver North. Oliver North.
Oliver
I
North,
mean, it was just
that's
this
it. Yeah.
big, it was this big thing, and I was little. Like we would have been really young, so I only remember bits and pieces. But man, that picture of her like posed on his lap, which it wasn't really that bad of a picture to be honest, but it was like on every magazine. It's always the woman has led someone down the wrong path, and it goes all the way
Sure.
back to Genesis where they want to blame Eve because Adam bit the apple, and I'm like, Adam had free will. Adam chose to do like it. Also, it's a story. It's allegory probably. Like
hmm
it's probably not as literal as you're taking it. That's gonna ruffle some feathers that I said that.
Yeah.
But that's gonna light the match, that little statement. But Adam was perfectly capable of making the right choice. And if he was supposed to be the head of the household, then why did he choose poorly?
Right. And why does all the sin of the world now become Eve's fault?
Exactly. And and
You know
and
what I
to be
mean?
honest, circling back for deconstruction, I was raised in an atmosphere where that was quoted to me regularly.
hmm
That
Sure.
that the sin of the world was Eve's fault, and that's why we have pain in childbirth. And that was told to me from a very young age the
hmm
whole way till I was delivering my first child, and I made the nurse kick my dad out of the room. My dad was sitting there going, well, this is just, I know it's hard, but this is what God intended because Eve, and I was like, you have got to get him the out of this room. Like I'm gonna kill him, and I've got an epidural in, but I don't. It's not working. Like, and she did. She got him out. But that that's a belief system of women should bear pain because of something that may or may not be a true fable, possibly. And that's coming
Right.
from someone who deeply believes in God. That I'm saying to you,
Same.
Genesis might be an allegory fable to help you understand character, and
Yeah.
it is not intended for you to place blame. Like that's nonsense.
Yeah. Yeah.
So,
And I mean, and it just got for me that the more that I read and the more
hmm,
that I studied and the more
yeah,
that I actually, what I believe, entered into actual conversations with God that
yes,
were not,
yes,
oh, dear God, Holy Father, please
the
find a
begging
way for me to
prayers.
get that
Yeah,
new pair of shoes that my kid wants. I need those Air Force Ones. Like, can you throw $100 in my, like
right,
to
right,
actually have some real, like, actual faith
right.
conversations with a being that I feel was Jesus. I never got any of the condemnation or
Mm-mm,
any of that. And it's like, and
Yeah.
I tried, and like I said, I tried several churches, and every single church I tried ended in scandal, just gloriously went down in flames. And to the point where I was just like, you know, I'm like, I feel like that this is just a self-fulfilling prophecy at this point, because
Yeah.
I keep trying to give these institutions a chance, and they keep
Yeah.
like just
Yeah.
going off the rails in the
Yeah.
craziest way. Like the next church that I ended up going to, actually, we're friends with we're mutual friends with them.
Yes. Hmm.
With yeah, so I actually found out that they were going to this church on accident,
Hmm.
because I was taking care of the wife. The pastor's wife was a patient of mine, and she was one of my cancer patients. And
Right.
to be, I mean, I knew that she was religious because she was Pentecostal and she looked the part, hair piled on the
Sure.
top of the head, always wearing
Sure.
skirts.
Sure.
She was very meek, but she was a wonderful woman. Loved her to pieces. And she and her husband had a church, and so they invited me to church, and that's like how I found out that they were all connected. And so I thought, well, this is good. This is good, because Chad's got a friend who's going to this church. I've got a friend. We know somebody. We're going to go
Right.
there. It's going to be great. And then she ended up dying. And things fell apart quickly. Like,
Yeah.
very, very quickly.
It's
And
interesting how she was the glue there.
yes, she was the glue. And
Yeah.
I was hospicing with her, and just
Hmm.
kind of not officially, because I was still very much working at
Right.
the hospital. But
Right.
we had
But
gotten
she was your
close,
friend and you wanted to help, and that's
and
yeah.
I was trying to be as helpful to her as I possibly could. And the
Sure.
things that I witnessed going on in that house while she was dying, and the things that happened after she died, he ended up getting married to somebody very quickly. It was a really ugly
Yeah.
situation. Like, the church
Yep.
split, and ultimately, I mean, I don't even know where he is now. I think he lives somewhere else, but basically, like, lost his church. It went down in flames, is what I'm saying. And he would be the first person, because I liked him because he would debate with me.
Right.
So I would, and I could never change his mind, you know what I'm saying?
Right.
But I could talk to him about, like, this is what I'm
Right.
seeing when I read this. And of course he would then tell me how wrong I was and why I was wrong. And I was just like, I said, well, my college degree and my knowledge of language
Right.
and syntax, and it doesn't say what
Right.
you're saying,
Right.
and very much believed that gay people could be converted, and all kinds of other little things like that. And but
Right.
I stuck with it as long as I did, because I enjoyed the fellowship with our friends that we had at that time. And
Hmm.
then I started really noticing that was really the only reason that I was going. And then he made a statement one time when he was completely off the rails about how he was, like, really on board with burning the Quran. And I'm like, I think we're done here, because
Yeah. That's
I
disrespectful.
I
Mm-mm.
grew up in a really diverse environment, and then of course
Yeah.
that, I
Yeah.
would say, also
I'm
is
not okay
like
with
the
that.
point.
No.
Yeah, like the
No.
point where I mean, in working at UAMS, I had many, many
No.
Muslim friends. I knew
Yeah.
that the characterization of being Muslim that was being portrayed in media,
Right.
and is still portrayed in media, was very
Still,
much
yes.
incorrect. I had
Yes.
had multiple conversations with these women about their faith and their beliefs, and
Mm-hmm.
why they
Mm-hmm.
were doing the things that they were doing, and how much of that was culture, and how much of that
Right.
depended on where you
Right.
lived. And kind of the same in the United States. You
I was
have
just going to say,
the
you really
North
have to look at
and
those
the
far
South.
extremists. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Not very
And
different.
so, to
Not very
just
different.
be
Yeah.
promoting hate. And right about that time is when politics started to enter the pulpit, and how you were going to be a bad
And that's
person
a
if you weren't a Republican.
yeah, that's a no
and
for me too.
and so,
Politics and
at that
religion
point,
don't go together.
I was
They do
like,
not.
guys, come on.
They don't.
Yeah.
Uh-uh.
So I had to break away. I had to step back and go, this is not what I want to teach my kids. Like, I don't want to, again, being on the way home going, that's, if they have questions, like, that's not really what
Right.
I believe. And
Right.
and again, I had, chosen to be baptized there. Like, but it ended up not good.
Yeah.
And
Yeah. I
takes me
understand.
back to those core core values of like, okay, what is it that I really believe God is, and what is the character of Christ, and what is the Christ
Right.
consciousness,
Right.
and
What does that look
so
like?
now,
Mm-hmm.
yeah, what does that look like? But this isn't it for me.
Mm-mm. No. And that sounds very similar in a lot of ways to what I experienced. I left that church at 30 and entered into the Baptist denomination with some wonderful, wonderful people who I still love very much to this day as well, and I'm still friends with, but I no longer attend that church. And I've not officially, like, you can actually, like, here's the thing about the Baptist church that people may not know. You are a member until you tell them you're not a member. So, like, you're on the rolls. And now, if you that was a new concept for me too. But like if you move and you want to move your membership, you have to request that it be moved. Like you have to send a letter, or the church that you're moved to can send one on your behalf and just say, hey, this person's moved here. Would you release their membership to us? Which sounds very official to me. I always thought it was a little odd, but that's okay. Like there's some things, whatever. Um, but so yeah, I'm still on the rolls because how do you write a letter and tell people that you love that you fundamentally disagree with? You know what I'm like? I don't know how to word that letter yet. At
Mm-hmm.
some,
Yeah.
at some, also that is a rock thrown into a pond that might become a tsunami. Like I haven't gotten to that point, and it's not because I intend to go back. It's just because because I'll say this, because I have been through religious trauma, I'm very careful to try not to inflict it on other people,
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
even unintentionally. So I realized how powerful, because they're going to read that letter from the pulpit also, by the way. They'll
Mm-hmm.
have a meeting, they have a business meeting once a month, and they're going to read that letter from the pulpit. So everybody in attendance will hear it. And so I'm like, whatever I write needs to be very intentional and very carefully worded. And I don't know how to do that yet because I haven't fully wrapped my brain around this deconstruction because I never thought I would be here
Mm-hmm.
again. The first one was
Right.
so hard. The first one was so, so hard, um, and so painful that I could have never imagined having to do it again. And then um, COVID showed up. And a lot of our listeners may have experienced this in different ways that don't have anything to do with religion, but COVID showed us who people were. COVID showed us who they really
Ooh, wee,
were.
didn't it though? Ooh,
It did.
didn't
It
it?
just pulled the masks right off. And
Mm-hmm.
what I saw, it wasn't that I didn't like it, because like doesn't have anything to do with it. What I saw was really unbelievable in many ways. I
Yeah.
saw the need to keep doors open so that we could keep money coming in, to keep the machine
Mm-hmm.
running. That was shocking to me. Um, I saw people die from COVID because we didn't shut the doors or keep them shut long enough. And when I brought that up, it was really kind of brushed off. Like, well, they didn't go, well, that's not our fault, but it was definitely it was not addressed. It was, oh, it was sad we lost them. Like, yeah, but that was, you lost them because they worked for you, and they worked for you in a capacity where they cared for young children who were awesome vectors of this disease, and you
Yeah.
kept those doors open, or you reopened them too soon. Like, there was no acceptance of responsibility, that they had probably put that person in that position. Obviously, they didn't intend for anything to happen, but something did happen, and someone that our family loved dearly and deeply, I think, died from something they didn't have to. I honestly don't think that person would have died had that not been the expectation that they be there. to
Yeah.
tend to the children. And then when they reopened, initially there was some, pew separation and things like that. People ignored it. We went back and began hearing more political things. It had
Mm-hmm.
started before COVID a little bit, and then it really started coming in um, around that time, and that was real unsettling to me. And then by this point, my kids are older. They're
Mm-hmm.
teenagers, junior high age, and so we started going back to church, and there were some things that we noticed that were different, that were quite expensive, that had been purchased, and I was a little bit shocked about it because I'm thinking, you know, we're a community in crisis still. Like we're stumbling out of COVID, right? Like we're stumbling
Mm-hmm.
out of COVID. And we have all of these deeply impoverished people that live around this big church, but we're spending money on things that don't make sense. And there was an embezzlement going on. I mean, we could see the objects, and I thought to myself, I didn't voice it, but I just remember thinking, this just something doesn't feel right here, like that, intersection of faith and really walking out what Jesus has called us to walk out, that something's not right here. And so we kept going on for a couple more weeks, and we would ask the kids at the end of every service, what did you think about today? And we would talk. We'd always done that. We still do that when we're talking about religious things. And one of my girls said, well, it's kind of weird to me, Mom, that we spent X number of dollars on these improvements in the building when I know that Mr. So and so that lives across the street doesn't have electricity on right now. And it's summertime.
Yeah.
It's hot, it's 100 degrees. And her younger sister said, yeah, I don't understand. Why are we? I said, well, let's talk about that. And they did. The kid, I didn't say anything. Steve didn't have to say anything. The three older children expounded on the idea on their own at that table that day, at the kitchen table that day, of what it looks like to be a follower of Jesus versus going to a church. Like the intersection of, are we really walking out our faith?
Mm-hmm.
Or why are we fundraising for this particular improvement? Why are we fundraising for this trip? Like, why are we taking these trips? Like, why are we not ministering to the people across the street who don't have electricity? And so our own children
Right.
were able
Oh,
to see that.
we
They
could
were
do a
able to
whole
see
separate
that.
show on the
Hmm.
colonization that happens on mission trips. Like we could do a whole
Yes.
separate show
Yes.
on, because I know,
Yes,
like
we
for me, when
could.
I was seeing some of that, I was like, oh, this is, oh no, I don't want to do this. Like
Yeah.
these people were
Yeah.
perfectly fine without us. They don't need our opinions,
No, no.
and to
Mm-mm.
actually see in real time their lives being made worse
Hmm.
by
By
that, and you're
us
just
butting in. Yes. Yes.
right. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. So we just kind of talked to our kids about it, and I said, well, your dad and I have had these conversations privately, so it's interesting. You guys are noticing it on your own. And they just looked at us and they said, something doesn't feel right here anymore. And I said, okay, then as a family, let's make a decision together what you want to do, we want to do, what we should do, what we believe, what do we believe is true. And we just kind of made ourselves a list, the six of us sitting there, and we said, this is what we believe. And is this what's being lived out in this body of Christ? And it was not. We've tried going to other churches, and like I've said, now we've gotten to the point, like we've moved even forward in our work as a family and working through these things, that we're not going to attend a church where people that we love cannot come, who are not
Yeah.
welcome, who are going to show up and be
Right.
made to feel that they're going to go to hell, or that they need to be converted, or they need to go to a camp to be they don't need to be different. They don't need to be any different. They're made exactly the way they're supposed to be made, and they're still an image bearer. They were from the minute they were formed, and they'll be to the minute that they die. And so that this deconstruction has been less painful, probably because I've already done it before, but also
Mm-hmm.
because I'm just older and I've learned that it's okay for me to believe differently. That doesn't mean that I
Right.
don't love those people even more, honestly, than I did before, because I see them in their all in their humanness. That in the same way that I hope they see me, that we're all human and we're just doing the best we can. And I can love them for who they are, and I can dislike some of the things that they believe in, and that's okay. You don't have to throw the baby out with the bathwater, but we also don't have to go to church and sit next to each other and pretend nothing's wrong with what's going on.
Right. Yeah. Right. And I mean, or just sitting there and not feeling like you have the ability to say, to like even have a conversation, which I think in a
Yes,
lot of times, it
yes,
that the ability to have a conversation is probably what kept me at the last place as long as it did, even though I didn't feel like it fruitfully changed the perspective at all.
right.
But at least
But
he
you
would
were
he
still
would
able to
humor me.
talk. Yes,
He would
yes.
humor me, and then he would be like, Heather, you're just a crazy little liberal, and this, you feel this way, and because I took issue, a lot of times, even with the like just the direct misogyny in the church,
Oh,
and the
sure. Yeah,
racial overtones of things. And
yes,
I would say,
yes.
what you said, that wasn't really cool. Like, I mean,
Yeah,
you have no idea. Obviously, you haven't studied any of these other religions to know what they're about. Like, you don't know anybody who's
right,
actually a Muslim. You don't have any idea like what
right.
that middle of the road, because we're only sold the extremist version of being
Exactly.
Muslim. We're not shown the middle of the road, like just trying to get through their life, spiritual person version of
The,
being a
mhm,
Muslim,
mhm.
you
Yeah,
know
I was,
and
yeah, I was fortunate in pharmacy school to have my first and to date, I suppose, only Muslim friend. I know that sounds probably really strange to people, and I beg of you, if you're not living in the South, please hear us.
yeah.
We didn't create the dynamic we live in. Okay, we did not create this. We are here living our life just like somebody in France is over there living theirs. Nobody's going to uproot and move their whole family just because it's not necessarily diverse. We have jobs and lives and family that we have to take care of. But I really feel like God put that person either in my life or mine and hers. I don't know which, maybe both.
Mhm.
She, absolutely precious, the friendship that I gained with her, and the knowledge about that religion and their faith, and just her patience, her absolute patience and loving kindness to explain things to me and let me ask any question that I wanted to ask. And then she could ask me
Yeah.
anything. She would ask me questions. Neither of us was trying to convert the other. We were just trying to learn more about each other and be friends and support each other. And I remember 9/11 happened, and she called me because she was married and had two children at the time. And she wore a hijab, and she was terrified to come to school the next day, um, because there had already been reports, of Muslim women being attacked in larger
Mhm.
cities. And she
Yeah.
said, I'm really scared. And I said, well, what do you want to do? What do you feel like the right thing to do is? And she said, um, my husband doesn't want me to wear my hijab tomorrow. He's scared for me, which was sh- shocking. I mean, that's how scared he had to be, because he was also just a very kind man, very sweet. I met him on multiple occasions, but very devout. Both of them were very devout Muslim. And
Mhm.
and I said, is that what you want to do? And she said, he says, my safety is the most important thing. I said, okay, well, I'll meet you. Where do you want me to meet you? And I'll walk in with you, because she had not been uncovered in public since before her marriage. So at
Yeah.
least 10 years. She was a little bit older. She was older than me. She got married, like 19 or 20, and she had her children and then came back to farm. So she was older than me by probably 8 or 10 years. And I just remember how that broke my heart for her, because to her that was such a sacred thing to keep
Hmm.
herself covered. Um,
Yeah.
and and she did. She came to school without it the next day, and I had seen her without it. We had actually traveled together, so I had been inside sort of that little closed circle because we shared a hotel room. And I told her, I was like, "Listen, I'll get my own hotel room. I don't want to." She's like, "No, no, it's okay. You're female. It's fine. You don't have to be Muslim to see me without it." But like I cannot be in public, and so I'd seen her, but nobody else had.
Yeah. And
Uh,
it's so weird that we were like there in school at the same time,
I
like
know,
only
isn't
me in a
that
different
wild?
college. That
That's
is
so
wild because I
crazy.
remember
That's
I was in
wild.
clinical that day. I was in
Yeah,
clinical the day
yeah,
9/11 happened. Yeah.
yeah.
And it was just, and it's so, and I mean, of course, that there are other things that come into play in as far as my deconstruction journey, and like I
Right.
do identify as a witch. I'm a Jesus loving witch. I believe in Jesus. I do that, but the reason that I've chosen to identify that with that, even though there's like such a negative connotation, is that witch is derived from the word witcha, which
Hmm.
means wise woman. And so to me, witch isn't, like the antithesis of
Right.
Christianity.
Right.
It's just that I
Right.
have taken the time to educate and really, really dig down deep in what I do believe,
Right.
and what makes sense to me in my soul, and what helps me heal and helps me get past things. And I just haven't found that, no matter what flavor of the Christian faith I have tried, that it helps me do that. And if the only thing that I feel is fear, anger, and shame when I walk in or out of the door of the church,
Yeah.
I don't see
Yeah.
how that helps me move
Right.
forward. And, I've had people say, oh, but it's not God, it's the people. Yeah, well, the people are who you have to spend time with in the church. Like going through COVID and stuff, I had seen pastors telling their congregation members not to be vaccinated, that it was the mark of the beast. And I
Yeah.
have seen
Yeah.
churches decimated,
Hmm.
like, and I was just
From
like, and I'm like,
ignorance.
that's not your place. That's not your place. Like,
Yeah.
Jesus didn't make you an expert in medicine.
Right.
Like he didn't.
Right.
How did we get here? Like, and
Yeah.
I don't
Yeah.
I don't fault anybody for choosing to take a vaccine or not take a vaccine. Please don't take that the wrong way. Your body is
Right.
your body, and
Right.
you should be able to do with whatever the hell you want to do with it. I mean, that's your choice, but I feel like it was so out of pocket for people who had so little understanding of the vaccine just in general, to to
Right.
to feel comfortable enough to stand up in front of a congregation, and tell people that they shouldn't be vaccinated. Like that is
Yes.
just,
Yeah. Yeah.
you don't know the situation of every single
Right.
person. And it's so unfortunate, especially, like when you're in the nursing home, and COVID came through our nursing home a week before we were supposed to get our first vaccine. So pissed we didn't make it.
Yeah. Yeah.
And losing all of those lives, and the damage and the wreckage it's got. And I'm thinking to myself, and there are actually people who are in churches right now, like,
Uh-huh.
equating this to some sort of spiritual event, and I'm just like,
Yeah.
oh,
Yeah.
it if there wasn't a nail in the proverbial coffin before then,
That was it.
that's when that was
That's
it.
what it
That
hit.
was, I was just like, yeah, I'll never, and I don't, we talk about God, we talk about religion, we talk about different things, but,
Yeah.
I just don't, I can't get on board. I can't ride the train.
We've talked about as I said, right now we do not attend church. And then again, it's not that I would never. It's just I haven't, and there's no. I know what people are also going to say. Well, there's no perfect church. I know that. Didn't ask for the perfect one.
Sure.
Just asked for one that actually follows what Jesus said, which was love your neighbor. You know,
Yeah. I would
um,
really love like a Unitarian Universalist church. I think that would be fly. Like I could do that, but there's only one and it's an hour and a half drive.
yeah,
So,
yeah.
you know, that's a
So
long way to go for
that's a
fellowship that
long
doesn't
way.
really, yeah.
Yeah. So for now, we do home. You know, we discuss things. The younger ones and I have talked about doing our own sort of Bible study. Again, I've got one with special needs, so his level of understanding is far less than his older brother and older sister. I
Hmm.
have one child that, as of right now, is agnostic because of what she experienced during COVID and directly after. And that
Hmm.
has nothing, that honestly had nothing to do with me. I didn't even know the child had decided she was agnostic. Um, I was a little, taken aback. As someone who used to be a Christian writer, but I also respected the fact that she's her own person and she has to work through her spiritual journey with God,
Yeah.
or whatever
Mhm.
higher power that she believes in. And so I just am supportive and I'm here. She knows that I'm here and I love her. And um, it's hard for me to identify now in public, I think, as Christian because it has such a negative connotation right now. We've got all of these folks who are saying and doing some crazy, crazy, horrible things in the name of Christianity.
Yes.
So I guess what I would say is, yes, I believe in God, and I I'm a Christ follower, and that's who I look to.
Yeah.
That's
I mean, for
that's
me, Jesus
that's
is my
it.
homeboy. Jesus is my homeboy and Mary is my homegirl. Like to me, I enjoy a nice balance of, the divine feminine and the masculine and like I said, even from a young age, I've always felt this call towards her really,
Hmm.
and I think probably because, healing innately is in me as, you are a healer
Right.
too,
Hmm.
that
Yep.
the call to the divine feminine has always really spoke to me even from a young age. And but yeah, I mean, it's like, um, people are very confused about like my spiritual beliefs, but I say that's okay because I am too. I don't really feel like we ever have it
Yeah.
figured out.
No.
Like I think that it's important that we ask the questions, and I feel more spiritually connected now than I did, when I
Yes.
was going to the church every time the
Yes.
doors were open.
Yes.
There's
Yes.
nothing fake here. It's all
Nope.
real. I'm not
Yep.
pretending to be anybody for somebody. I'm not dressing a certain way to please people. I'm not,
Mm-mm.
going out and buying, floor length skirts so I have
Nope.
permission to sing in the choir. I'm just who I am, and I think that God prefers me this way because we can actually work on some stuff when I'm not fronting. You know,
Yes,
when I,
that part.
when
That
I'm
part.
like 100% like malleable to, to spirit and
Well, and
you know
I think that there's something to be said for being stripped of all of those things, and that's really what it
mhm.
felt like, especially the first time. I for a while I couldn't talk about it hardly at all, and a lot of people who knew me outside the church were really respectful of that and very careful because they knew I was like, she's pretty fragile right now. And I was, but it was also the first time that it felt like Jesus was like, okay, are you following me?
Yeah.
Because this is where it gets real. When you have to walk away from people that you love because they're not doing the things that they should be doing and following what they should be following, and you don't believe what they believe anymore, and your own family stops speaking to you for a while, um, and Jesus is all you got, you get real
Yeah.
close. And
Yeah.
that's you get real close. And that's it cost me so much to follow him. And that's what was such the ironic thing was like you're deconstructing from this man-made church
Hmm.
because you want to follow Jesus.
Yeah.
But it's going to
It is
cost you
radical.
it's radical, and it's going to cost you everything they have taught you is important. So that's painful. And you
Yeah,
don't know what to do. You're
absolutely.
like, you're in a boat with no oars, essentially. And Jesus is
Yeah.
kind of like, okay, well, here we go. Are you going to trust me or not? And I
Well,
said, sure, here we go,
right.
And
Yeah.
and the thing is, I've never gone wrong do it following just him.
No.
It's always been when I have taken my eyes off him,
Yes.
you know, just like
Absolutely.
Peter.
I
Just like Peter
remember
in the water. You take your eyes off of him, you're going to drown every time. And you can take your
I
eyes
was
off because of worldly things or churches, it doesn't matter.
mhm. I was out in the pasture one time, which is where I frequently have church all by myself. And I'll go out there and I sit there and usually I have this like little milk crate that I take out there and I'll sit cross-legged on top of it and I'll turn some music on and I'll just kind of close my eyes and it's always kind of just like it's really for me like a spiritual experience because my
Hmm.
horses when they recognize me doing that they will always come up and they'll
Hmm.
always come up and they'll sniff me and put their nose on me or whatever and then just kind of really enjoy my meditation time. And when I wake up they're kind of hanging their heads with their eyes all droopy and we're just having a moment.
Yeah.
And one time I was just out there and I was just saying, to God, I was saying, what I'm seeing all around me is so confusing. I don't see you in the world anymore. Like, I don't see you in my
Yeah.
neighbor. I don't see
Yeah.
you in my patients. I don't see you anywhere. Like, where the fuck are you? Like, what
Yep.
are we supposed to be doing here? Like, this is
Yep.
just disgusting. I don't want to raise my kids in this. And he
Yeah.
said to me very clearly, Heather, you're going to have to decide if you're going to be a collector or a table flipper.
Always pick table
And
flipper.
he's like, and
Always.
you have always known who you are.
Yeah.
And so that's what I take to the bank. And if my standing up for the rights of my brethren gets me, I don't know, sent to the gulag, I guess I'll go.
Right.
You know,
Yeah.
if
Yeah.
I get thrown to the wolves for refusing to let ICE take a patient,
Yeah. Yeah.
that's following God.
Yeah.
That's following God.
And
And
it's yeah, it's isolating. And but I would rather be by myself and be with God than be in a church full of people
yeah,
who proclaim one thing and do something else and
yeah,
continue to do that. Because when you get to our age, you start to see the same behavior in the same people over and over and over, and there's no changing, not real change. There's these shifts, there's these swapping of
yeah,
spouses, um, things like that. And it's just like, I don't want any part of that. I just want to take care of my family and I want to walk with
mm-hmm.
Jesus, and that's it.
Yeah,
And that's
yeah.
imperfect, and I'm imperfect, and he knows it, and he's not surprised. He's not ever surprised
You
by
know,
my behavior. you know.
I've always thought that it's always been really interesting to me from the time because I will say, in my own little woo woo way, I've always been very sensitive to spirit. That
I
caused me
think
a
I
lot
have.
of
Yeah.
problems growing up because
Yeah.
I might actually see granddad in the corner and know what he's saying. You know what I'm saying? Like,
Yeah.
so so I've
Yep.
always been very sensitive to spirit, and it's always really amazing to me. I think that this is the thing that really started to pull me away from an actual like organization is that I when I say this is what Jesus says to me, the amount of people who rebuke me
Yep.
and say, well, that's not what the word says. Okay. But Jesus wasn't following a word.
Mhm. No.
No. So, he was just out there being Jesus. You know, he was just out there being Jesus. And he had, in fact, done exactly what we're doing. He had stepped
Mhm.
away from the faith of his
Mhm.
youth and condemned
Mhm.
it and said, you guys are nothing but a bunch of senseless rule
Vipers.
makers who are going out here
Mhm.
and making salvation 10 times harder than it needs to be. All you really
Mhm.
have to do is love one another and stand
Yep.
up for what's right and love your neighbor and let the refugee seek refuge.
Yep.
Welcome them into your land. Uphold people, lift
Yep.
them up, and treated women equally. And even when, as far as to say, when the ladies were fighting, look, I know that it's important for you to be over there
Yeah.
doing the serving and the cleaning, but
Right.
she's here learning
Right.
the fruit of the word actually is.
Right.
So
And it's not
I'm never
works.
going to be I'm
Yeah.
never going to be comfortable with people who tell me that I don't hear God. I'm like, no, because I do.
Yeah. So that
Maybe
didn't go over well. The few times I mentioned that, at the Baptist church, that did not go over well either. Um, but I think when you have a very deep prayer life and when you talk to God, scripture does talk about pray without ceasing. And, I always thought that meant, well, you just pray all the time, but I've learned in the last 4 or 5 years, for me, that really means there's a continuality. There's a continuity where things are happening and I'm having a conversation with God about it without thinking about having a conversation with God about it, if
sure.
that makes sense. So,
Yeah.
yes, there are times that I'm going to sit down and have formal prayer, but for the most part, 90+% of the time, I'm doing the laundry and I'm not even forming words to send to him about, but it's my spirit is speaking the grief, the anger, the frustration, the fear, whatever, joy. Um,
Right.
and so that's being in communion with the spirit and being in
Yes.
communion with God and talking to Jesus. And so when you are struggling or when you have questions and you're in those moments and words come to you, where are they coming from? Am I supposed to say that my own mind came up with this idea? That
Mm-hmm.
my own mind? I don't believe that really, because it's too far beyond my comprehension. I would have never come up with whatever that answer was myself. I didn't say to myself, you know what's going to make this better? Go find a new husband. Go buy a yacht. I mean, no, that's not what's coming out.
Right.
It's not. It is these deep, I wouldn't even say philosophical, but I would just there, and it
Mm-hmm.
always returns back to love. It is always involving what does it look like to love one another, to to serve one another, to help your
Right.
brother or sister in need. And those answers are simple, but they're deep because they're not face value. It's not about writing a check. Listen, if it was about writing a check, I could have written a check to an orphanage in Ethiopia like that. That's not
Mm-hmm.
what it was about. So I don't go around telling people, people ask us all the time, why in the world did you adopt a kid from Ethiopia? Like, you had three kids. Like, listen, it's complicated, okay? But the short is, Jesus told me to. And people don't like that answer because it doesn't fit in the box, right? They want it to
Right.
be, well, I heard this worship or I heard this or, at church. And so I was moved to, no, listen to me. It was 2:30 in the morning and I was praying and crying over the children that were orphaned in the world and said, God, what do you want me to do? Like, I can't live with this, but I can't do anything about it. And I knew immediately what I was supposed to do, and it didn't involve a check. Now, who comes up with that? Not a human being. A
No.
rational human being at 2:30 in the morning by themselves on the floor of their living room praying to God doesn't go, I've got this great idea that I'm going to adopt a kid who's going to end up having special needs and rock my whole world for the rest of my life. They're not. They're not. That's That's a God thing. And so I think it's very easy for people to brush off and call you crazy or call, there's no way, you're just making that. Listen, you know why you say that? Because you are not walking with him this way.
Mm-hmm.
You're showing up for all of the things, and that's not what it's about. You're worried about your solo on Sunday. We don't care. I'm sorry. I know that's going to hurt somebody's feelings, but you're worried about your solo on Sunday because the choir's singing and they've asked you. Listen, Jesus does not, that solo's not changing anybody's life. It's
Right.
not.
And and I don't fault people who
No, sing it if
if
you
they
want
choose to
to.
do. Yeah,
Whatever.
if that's what you choose, like that, I mean, this is obviously, a conversation that's personal, to the two of us, and I'm not
Yes.
condemning, organized religion in any
No.
way. I'm
Do
just
what you
saying
want.
that it doesn't work for me. And I've
Mm-mm.
tried many flavors.
And don't come
And
for
it
us
could.
when we say God speaks to us or we believe that we hear the Spirit because you don't hear
Right.
it.
Hmm. Yeah.
I mean,
And that's, I'm just, I'm like, it's interesting. I had at my little shop that I work at, I had a person, come in, and we got on the topic, and they were basically telling me, well, you need to come to my church
oh,
because,
yeah, oh, it's
you're
better.
just lost and all this other kind of
I'm
stuff.
not
And I'm just
lost.
like, I said, trust me, I ain't
Mm-mm.
lost. I said, I'm
I'm
not
not
lost. And
lost.
I said, and I appreciate your concern. And I said, but I probably know the word of God better than you do. And we can talk
Yes.
about that if you're willing
Right.
to talk about it.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm like, but that's not how I find my connection. And good for you.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not looking to a man to lead me. That's just
Mm-mm.
not my cup of tea. And
Mm-mm.
there will be people like, and he's like, well, do you believe that you're divinely gifted as a healer? And I said, I do believe that, but I also know that there are going to be people who will never darken your door, who need someone, who need a person who is open-minded, who will see them without
Mm-hmm.
seeing their failures, who will walk with them and fellowship with them despite the fact that they've made poor choices, because who hasn't made poor choices?
Mm-hmm.
And if God wants me to be a voice to those people, then that's fine. I'm fine with that. I'm not trying to be holy. I'm not
No.
trying to, you know, put on some kind of air. I spent my whole
Nope.
life, being drugged to church, trying to act a certain way and be a certain way,
Yes.
and never really
We don't.
finding any peace in it. And
Yes.
and if there are people who do find peace in it and can go be their whole selves there, then great. I'm just not one of those people.
I'm not either. No. We use the term in our house, playing church. We don't play church anymore at this house.
Right.
We're not playing church anymore. This is, and honestly, in reality, we used that term even when I was going to the Baptist church because that filter had already had fallen. Like once I got
Hmm.
past that initial ripping and shunning and moved into that next stage of spiritual growth, my filter came off because I was going to say
Yeah.
something. If I didn't believe that it was biblical, or if I didn't believe that it was, kind and whatever, I was going to say something, and that made waves, and it caused trouble, and I wasn't everybody's favorite person, and that's okay too. I'm okay with that. I'm still okay with that. Um, clearly, we're here. But I was fortunate at the time to have a pastor who has since passed away. Um, who was a wonderful mentor and welcomed my questions
Yeah.
and didn't try to change my mind. Listened to what I had to say, shared what he believed. I mean, I didn't change his mind, he didn't change my mind, but we were able to come together, and I had so much growth under him. I mean, honestly, I bless his heart, he's looking down, I'm sure, from heaven like, girl, I didn't mean for you to leave the
We
church.
grew, we
I
grew
meant
out
for
of
you to
church.
stay. I'm sorry, I outgrew it. But he really welcomed that because he knew I had been so stifled and so suffocated, and he wanted to see me grow. And I credit him for really teaching me to never stop asking those questions and to never stop following just as hard as I could after Jesus and loving people radically, just radically.
Yeah. Mhm.
I think it's a good policy, quite frankly.
Right. Right. And and I'm not saying that, like, I know that there are people out there who are still very much, in organized religion, who
Yes,
do
yes,
love rap and who do
yes,
that.
yes,
And I
yes,
have the utmost respect for those people, because it takes a lot of, I think, separation of,
yes,
your spiritual path, and then not getting drawn into what is actually happening around you, like when the rubber meets the road.
yeah,
And
yeah,
I respect
yeah,
that. It's just not.
yeah.
Uh,
It's not for me, but
it's
I
not for
see
me.
people do it
Mm.
all the time that I do know are very genuine in their love for other people. And they just keep showing up. They're like, well, church isn't perfect, but I need to be in church and this is the closest thing I can find to what I believe. And hey, I did that for a long time. And if they can keep doing it and it works for them, that's why I'm not critical of them still going. That's why Heather and I are not sitting here saying, everybody leave the church. We're saying, we, we're not saying that. We're saying we left because it was what was right for us in our spirit, in order for us to be as close to God as we could be and to do what we feel like He wants us to do. Because we're very different. Heather and I have different beliefs. But we still accept and love what each other believes and support that. But we just can't do it in a church building right now. I mean, that might change. I would love if that changed. I like fellowship at
Right.
church. I
I mean,
miss the
because
chicken and
when I
dumplings.
started down this road, I read everything. I mean,
Yeah, yeah, same,
I read
same.
Saint Thomas Aquinas. I read, um, oh gosh, the Gnostic Gospels. I read,
Hmm.
the feminine divine, like the Mary Magdalene books. I read
Yeah,
them all, like,
yeah,
trying to figure out, what actually is it that's calling me to not, be involved in
right.
religious life in this way. And so, and I don't think that there are a lot of people who really do that. I don't think that they seek outside their box. And
There you
once
go.
I
And that's
did seek
okay.
outside my box, I was like,
That's
okay,
okay. I don't think everybody
yeah,
can handle outside the box, and that's okay. I mean, really, there's no judgment there. Um, Not from
sure.
me, and I don't think Heather either. It's just that part that
Mm-mm.
wasn't for us. So anyway, so
Yeah,
Heather,
just don't
I
hate
am
me when I say I don't want.
right, right, right. Very, very good point. All right, Heather, are we going to wrap up for this time? So next
Yeah,
episode, believe
we'll
it or
wrap
not, folks, there's more about deconstructing. You're like, wait,
it.
what? More? There's more. That's only half of it. There's more. Although we probably have covered some of what was more, but I think next time we're going to talk a little bit more about what we've done to kind of take care of ourselves and really
Hmm.
nurture that growth. Because if you're not in a church and you don't have that structure, FYI, Catholic structure is great. I've been to churches there. It's very calming and very like secure
Yeah.
and safe. I get when you were describing that, I was like, oh yeah, Catholic services it's like putting on a blanket, and I'm not Catholic. Like I do nothing
Yeah.
going in there. I didn't know what to expect. But I was like, oh wait, we have a schedule? This is a schedule. Y'all, did you know that the Catholics
Right.
have a schedule? This is fantastic.
I
You know,
always felt that way. I had a friend who was Jewish, and I would go to church with them sometimes too. And I feel that way
I
about
think
the
I would
Jewish
love
faith
that
as
too.
well.
I've
Although
never
I
been,
don't
but
have
yeah.
I don't have any frame of reference for what's happening. Like none. I
No,
don't
you don't
know,
speak Hebrew.
I don't know the language. So
I love
I'm
it.
just kind of like, but it's
You're just like,
still a very
yeah,
ritual
yeah.
centered, like,
Mhm. My
yeah.
understanding is it is. I
And
have
and
not
I think
been. Yeah.
right. And they're also encouraged to ask questions. And it's also okay if you don't
Yes.
believe in God.
Yes.
So
I think
there's a
there's a lot of
place for you there.
yes.
And I think
That
that that's really beautiful.
yes. There's a comfort and security, and even I would dare say like a familiarity of, and
Hmm.
that acceptance that everyone is here, and yeah, it's yeah. I experienced something similar when I stayed at a convent. We'll talk about that next time. Heather, did you know I stayed in a convent? Full of surprises,
I
y'all.
did
You
not.
never know. You never know
Did you
what you're
know I
going to
lived with
get.
a cult?
What? No. Okay, we have to go. No, I did not know you
We'll
lived in a
talk about
cult.
that
So,
next time.
so now we're going to talk about the convent and the cult. Oh, that needs to be okay. After the next deconstruction episode, we're going to do an episode called "The Convent and the Cult." That's what's happening. That's going on the schedule. If you guys don't know, Heather and I completely fly by the seat of our pants. We have notes. We try to use them. We have an outline. But like every time we get ready to record, we're like, we have 50,000 topics. Which one are we going to talk about? We don't know till the day before. So we can't decide because we have ADHD. Oh, I love you, Heather. I'll talk to you soon, okay?
Love you too, girl. Talk to you later. Bye.
Bye.